Hi everyone, it's Steph from stelliumastrology.com. I am your host. You're listening to the Stellium Astrology podcast. I am currently putting out shows that are pre-recorded for you guys because where would you be without this show in your ears every week? And quite frankly, I haven't got anything better to do with my time than, sit here and pre-record a bunch of shows. I'm joking, of course. I'm actually on maternity leave. And, I just did not want to interrupt the flow of this podcast because it brings me so much joy. And I know that it brings a lot of people a lot of joy. I love sharing. I love talking. I love astrology. And this is the perfect medium to do that. I have been... I am putting out my podcast relaunching it on YouTube. So from the beginning, and having content to put out. Basically, that'll start probably when I do go on my maternity leave. It's useful for me to be putting stuff out there. I do record a lot of stuff for YouTube anyway, but a lot of it is private content, which I have got for my Patreons. Now, putting this out on YouTube doesn't mean it's going to be like an enhanced podcast where it's got videos and images. It will just have the links to the episode links for you to. It's just another place to listen, basically, because people like to listen to podcasts from all sorts of places. So that's kind of my plan. If you're listening on YouTube right now, please subscribe and please like. Because it helps. It all helps. And if you're listening on your phone, take your phone out your pocket and just leave me a review on iTunes. If you can't leave me a review and subscribe and rate me, then just screenshot the fact that you're listening and tag me on Instagram at @StelliumAstro. You don't understand how much joy that brings me. I can't even begin to tell you how much I love when people screenshot that they're listening to the show. It's lovely to know that I'm reaching you. And I get lots of emails from people who are enjoying the show. Send me an email, stephanie@stelliumastrology.com. And you know what? I do get around to it. I do look at your charts and stuff. I just get a bit bogged down with life sometimes. As you can imagine, I've had a lot to sort out, what with this impending arrival of a new human in my life. So a whole new person. But today I thought I would talk to you. This kind of is inspired by a number of things. Mostly, though, I did a class for the LSA, the London School of Astrology, on creating a transit diary. Now, what happens when you create a transit diary is that you are able to go back. Now, you may be somebody who's already kept diaries throughout your life. I'm somebody who's always had a diary. Like, I don't necessarily, sit down and write, "Dear diary, today I had a weird feeling because of blah, 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 and so upset me and whatever." I mean, I still do that. I do write stuff like that, but it's not like I journal my life. I just sometimes write stuff when I'm annoyed or if I'm really happy, if it's something I don't ever want to forget. I make sure that I write it in my diary. Since I started studying astrology, I've made sure that I always write the date and the time. If you've not got one of those diaries, it's like a day to a page that you would be writing on the day. It's worth just, putting a little note to say 3rd of March at 9:21 a.m. Just discovered that I've been accepted onto a very exclusive, party invitation, whatever, something that's cool and fun that you don't want to forget. But always put the time as well, because it's really, really useful actually as astrologers, as we are. I've got one of those memories as well that if I'm writing something in my diary, I usually can remember where I was when I wrote it. So I don't need to put the location, but if you forget about that stuff, you can include those details. I'm also one of those people that if I'm walking down the road, if I'm talking, or I leave a lot of voice notes for my friends. Basically, I could have been doing this podcast so much longer, so many years more, but instead I was just leaving voice notes for my friends and stuff like that. So essentially, I just think of that as like practice for podcasting. But yeah, sometimes I'll be leaving a message for somebody and certain words will trigger where I was when I left that message. So if I'm listening back to the message for whatever reason, I can literally imagine exactly where I was when I left that. I can't remember what that's called, but that's a weird thing. That's a weird thing. Do you guys get that? I'm curious to know what triggers your memory. But anyway, I'm digressing as per usual. Now today I wanted to help you to connect with your mysterious chart placements. Now, the whole chart looks like a mystery at the beginning. So I'm guessing that really I'm telling you how you can connect with your entire chart if you want to. But it might be better to focus on certain areas first, like maybe pick one place and work from that one place and then start to expand. Obviously, if you've been doing astrology for a really long time, or even if you've been doing it for not such a long time, but you're already kind of to grips with it all, I'm sure there's a placement in your chart that you still look at and think, I still don't really know what that means. I know for myself, it's a constant learning curve. You're always learning, you're always picking stuff up, and sometimes you just think, that's what that means. So I'm going to give you some pointers on how to tune into that stuff. Now, this is probably going to be particularly useful for you if you have something like any planets in the 12th house. I have Chiron in the 12th house, which is an asteroid, not a planet. And for me, Chiron has always been a bit of a black spot in my knowledge. And I do describe the 12th house. It's almost like when you're opening the door to somebody. Let's say the door opens outwards instead of inwards into your home. Let's say your front door opens outwards and you've got somebody standing on your doorstep who's rung the bell. You open the door and you can see that person, but there's still something behind the door you can't see. That's the 12th house. Your view is very obscured. It's not clear at all. Even if you had glass on your front door to look through, with the 12th house, it's that kind of frosted, like textured glass that's not easy to see through. So you could have a person standing behind there and you can maybe make it out, but you can't really connect with them. You can't really see what they look like. And that kind of is a bit like what it's like to have a planet in the 12th house. You might know that we all know we've got, like, there's people that have got like sun in the 12th house and like stellium of planets in the 12th house. They know they've got those planets in their charts, but they just find them really hard to connect with. So other things that can make it difficult is if you've got Neptune making an aspect to any of your planets. It could be conjunction, it could be a trine, it could be a square. But Neptune itself is very 12th house. It's very Piscean. It's kind of hard to tune into. It's more, I don't know, sometimes it's not for some people, but just, this is just my tips for you if it is. So that kind of thing can make it difficult. Now, what you need to do, you can tune into these placements on a number of levels. The best way to do this, probably the best way to do this, the most readily available to you, is to follow the moon around the chart every month. Look, if you've got an ephemeris, which, I've told you about these magical ephemerides books. I've got my notebook with me here, by the way, so I'm just making notes so I know that I have to put a link for you to the ephemeris, to an ephemeris, any ephemeris. But if you've got a book of numbers, that tells you where the moon phases are in the month, where the moon's passing through. So, for example, I'm looking at the American ephemeris, 1950 to 2050. If you have a look at the moon's position, you've got at 0 hours and at noon, you can have a look and see, for example, let's say you have your sun's in Leo at 14 degrees Leo in the 12th house in your natal chart. Then what you can do is you can look at in the month when the moon is going to be in Leo, particularly when it's going to pass the 14th degree. Now this is going to happen roughly 12 times a year. So every single month you have an opportunity to connect on a lunar level. And what's good about the lunar level is that though it's not as clear as looking with the sun, the sun really spotlights things, it really highlights things. The moon is a very intuitive and emotional connection. So make a little note of each time, you need to pay attention to a certain aspect of your chart. So let's say it's your sun at 14 Leo in the 12th house, which you just feel like, I just cannot connect with that Leo vibe. I had a client who, she said she gets her Virgo, I think, she got Virgo rising. She really got the Virgo rising. She really gets so many aspects of astrology, but when it came to connecting with Leo, she just did not get it. Apart from the fact that she always had really lovely hair, like her hair looked great all the time, but apart from that, she just didn't get it, like wasn't really interested in the spotlight, this, that and the other. All very 12th house. So, yes, connecting on a lunar level, it's worth either setting an alarm on your phone so that you know that every month, okay, the moon is going to pass my sun in Leo today. And what's great about the moon passing any planet, any placement, any angle, anything in the chart, is that it's very reflective. In the same way that the sunlight reflects off of the moon reflects the sun, so in the same way that the moon reflects sunlight, the message that a planet is carrying is reflected back at you when the moon transits. So basically, it's very easy to tune into something on an emotional level. It may not be a very objective level. So it may be that you are tuning into your sun or to whichever placement you're looking at on a very subjective level. But then that's teaching you about what it means to you. And actually you're connecting it intuitively. You're connecting with it on a feeling level. Whenever I know that the moon's in Taurus and it's going to transit my Chiron, I always kind of prepare myself for being quite emotional at some point that day. It can be overwhelming and sudden. It can be shocking. But that's a good way to connect with any placement in your chart. If you wanted to learn more about your Mercury, if you wanted to learn more about your Venus, if you wanted to learn more about what Pluto meant to you, look at when the moon will transit those points in the month, and then you can do it on a monthly basis. And it's really about tuning into your chart. It's so funny because it gets to a point where you can actually almost feel where the moon is and what sign it's in based on what you're doing, what you're feeling, what you're thinking. It just kind of, when you do this enough, you tune into it. You really do. Some people are much more in tune with the moon than others as well. So some people just don't find that they connect with the moon. However, if you make a conscious effort to do it, you may enrich your connection with that lunar influence. So that's one way to do it. And that's actually probably the most practical way to do it, because the moon visits the chart once a month. It will go round and round and round and round and round. Some planets, it may actually transit 13 times in a year. It just depends. And this goes for anything as well. So if you wanted to sort of think about what your real ambitions were, what you really aspire to, maybe when the moon's on your midheaven, or maybe transiting your 10th house, you're going to be thinking more about how you can connect with that, what you aspire to and what you're feeling about that, about your current goals are. So that's one way to do it. Another way to do it, which is not so, it's useful, extremely useful, but you don't get as many shots at this one, is to observe the sun around the chart. And obviously the sun goes around the chart once a year. It never goes retrograde, so you only get one shot at your sun transiting, actually you don't, you get a few shots, but if you want to go by conjunction, which is where the planet is really spotlighted, or the point in the chart is really spotlighted, you will only get that one opportunity a year, basically. So the sun will only go past your ascendant once, it will only go past your IC once, it will only go past your descendant once, and it will only go past your MC once a year. And it will also only go past all your planets, your asteroids, everything once a year. So this is good if you are one of those people who's really interested in all this new stuff like Eris and Lilith and Vesta and Juno and Chiron and all of that you're, wanting to connect with, that aren't, maybe there's not as much information out there about these things. I mean, there's plenty online, but stuff that, often it has to become, for you to connect with it, you have to kind of really personally connect with these things. So it's a really good way for it to be highlighted in some way. And things you can look out for when the sun transits are not just like the obvious things, like say you were looking for, for me, for example, my Chiron in the 12th house in Taurus. So, you might say that I carry a wound, maybe it's a superficial kind of low self-esteem, because, Chiron in Taurus can describe a sense of no self-worth. There can be a sense of not really understanding your own value. So it could be that you get a lesson when the sun goes past that point of points where in your life you didn't actually value yourself enough. Or it could be that you get a very archetypal lesson. You might see where you're carrying some kind of wound that you're not really healing from. And you also get this kind of sense of when there's a square to that planet or point, or when there's an opposition as well, you still can learn about that type of thing. But like I said, when the sun is in conjunction, it makes it a lot more easy to understand and to grasp. Now, hopefully that makes sense anyway. Now, another way to do this is to check the time of day that the planet or point that you want to explore is rising or culminating on the midheaven. So, for example, you might say, think, I really want to kind of connect with what my Saturn-Pluto conjunction means. Anybody who's got a Saturn-Pluto conjunction, put your hand up. I feel for you guys. I have one too. So natally, a Saturn-Pluto conjunction. Think about 2020 and all the kind of crap that happened in 2020. There's a lot of people out there that have that conjunction natally. I'm one of them. Now, if you want to connect with what Saturn-Pluto means to you, personally, you could wait until, have a look, for example, at when that's going to be rising in that day in your chart. An interesting anecdote, I always have these little anecdotes. I happened to be at a wedding once. It was a very unconventional wedding. It was a long wedding. There was a Moon-Jupiter conjunction that weekend, and it was a 3-day wedding. Moon-Jupiter in Libra as well, so big celebration party, romantic party type thing. And I happened to be over at the sink washing up, and while I was washing up, one person standing on one side of me, and I had one on the other side as well, and one of them was an older lady who was asking me personal questions about my relationship and asking me whether or not I wanted to get married and things that, like, I was like, well, it's early days, I'm not really sure if I'm kind of in that place, and it's kind of personal, that kind of thing. So I was getting kind of interrogated on a personal level on my right, and on my left I had her grandson saying to me, oh, I wouldn't say that if I was you. Oh, she's going to get very offended. I don't think that she'd appreciate it if you said that sort of thing. I think you should be very careful. And like telling me to be really careful about what I was saying on the other side. And I just was sandwiched between these two people thinking, what on earth am I supposed to say? I'm going to be myself with this lady because I'm a genuine person and I don't have to pretend that I'm anything that I'm not, because I just don't. Why? What's the point? And on my other side, I've got this person who's telling me all this stuff, and actually I found out was a load of lies afterwards, manipulating me and trying to make me feel awkward and second guess myself and not really know what on earth I was talking about. And I being an astrologer and having my phone in my pocket, I quickly cast a chart for that moment just after they left my side, and Saturn and Pluto had been rising. So I had this older woman on one side who is very Saturnian, very conservative, wanted to know if I was taking my relationship seriously, and wanted to know, and this was when that Saturn and Pluto weren't quite exact in their conjunction, but they were quite close. I think this is when they were in Capricorn. But you can do this with your natal placements as well. So When your natal placement is rising, so when you look at your natal chart, if you look at the degrees that you've got something, you can say, for example, so my Saturn and Pluto, my Pluto's at 29 Libra, my Saturn's at 3 Scorpio. Have a look at when 29 Libra is going to be rising, and just observe who's around you, what you're feeling like, what you want to present yourself like, whether or not how you actually feel like, whether you're even feeling sociable, and kind of observe what's going on with you. Same with the midheaven. When something reaches the midheaven, it's really out there and it's on display for all to see. So any of your natal placements, for example, like a Chiron in the 12th house placement natally, like I have, if that moves onto the midheaven, that degree, 22 Taurus, when that degree's on the midheaven, you might be able to observe around you, you might feel drawn. Maybe you meet somebody who's a social worker who works with people who have been come from very deprived backgrounds or very underprivileged upbringings, and that they clearly don't understand that they can have more than what they've got in this life. They've never been told that they can have more, and you feel drawn to kind of speaking to this person, or even exploring a field in social work, for example. That there are ways in which it kind of explains what that placement means, and actually kind of what it means to you in your chart too. Just as an example. So you can look at what the rising planets are doing all the time, or you can look at your own natal chart and think, hang on a second, at that moment, Capricorn happened, I think when Saturn and Pluto were rising, was my sun was rising. So my sun was rising when I was standing at that sink. My sun was rising, and I had Saturn and Pluto kind of very close either side of my sun, which happened to be transiting at the time. So it was a very unusual situation where the astrology was extremely literal. I was literally sandwiched between a Saturnian type and a Plutonian type, and there was me in the middle just being like, what? So hopefully that makes sense. Maybe I'll have to show a video at some point to explore that on a deeper level. And another way to do this, which is quite telling, is if you have synastry with somebody else. Somebody else can highlight your placements for you. Now, because I've been talking about my Chiron placement, I will, for example, talk about somebody who appeared in my life. There's been a few occasions where I've had people turn up who highlight the same placement in my chart a number of times, and usually around the same period of time, which means that you're learning that lesson. You're learning lessons connected to that placement. And ever since I've moved, relocated, I've had a lot of Sagittarius and Chiron lessons, which is interesting. And one of the girls that started at my work a few years back, she has Sun in Taurus, which is very close to my Chiron placement. And I couldn't help but notice every time we had a conversation, she just triggered me in some way. I just felt triggered. And I know she's a nice person. She's well-meaning. She's not horrible. But she is very Taurian. She can be quite blunt. And, she would say things that would really hit me on a level that it was unsettling for me, really unsettling. So her son, funny to say that it was unsettling. A Chiron in Taurus placement would be unsettling. And for her son to be there, spotlighting my Chiron, her words, her presence, the things that she was saying and doing was literally disturbing that part of my chart. So, sometimes it can be other planetary placements that cause that trigger. However, usually if somebody's sun's on one of your placements, you really learn about that. I also worked with a guy who his Mars was on my Venus and his Mercury was on my moon. And we had a lot of synastry, but the Mars-Venus conjunction and the Mercury-Moon was very, very obvious to me. As soon as I met him, I was like, I know I've got synastry with this guy. And when I immediately was like, I need to know when you were born, come what's your birthday, whatever. And he told me. And I looked and I was like, Mercury-Moon. We were talking about our past, our fun times when we were growing up, we didn't know each other, but the day we met, we were talking about stuff and we'd be like, we have literally had the same life. We've had the same stuff going on in our lives, similar friends, similar situations. And that Mars-Venus conjunction was like we had the same interests, and we just enjoyed each other's company. Now, it wasn't a romantic relationship in any stretch at all, but it was just a really friendly, fun. I'm still in touch with him. We're still really great mates. And it's just one of those things where you can feel the synastry you have with another person sometimes. You can just be around them and you're like, I've got strong synastry with this person. But there's just, you can pick up on it. And, you know, if you're that kind of person that wants to ask people to look at their charts, go right ahead and ask. However, if you want to be a bit more sly about it and not necessarily ask them deep questions about their astrological nature, you can just say, oh, when's your birthday? Because even if you just get their birthday, you can know which degree their sun's going to be at, roughly. So, you know, you can just get that sun placement and see where that is, and quite where what their presence highlights in your life and your chart. Finally, I would say, actually, no, I've got 2 more points. Firstly, I would say keeping a diary is key if you really want to get in touch with what you're about. And I would say I recommended it in a previous episode and in the classes that I recorded for the LSA. But the Moleskine diary for me, the weekly seminary, I think it's called. My internet connection is intermittent, but yeah, I will put a link up to find out exactly what it's called. But on the left hand side you've got little spaces for the days of the week, and on the right hand side you've got a whole note page. And for me, that's perfect because I've got my organisation side on one, and then on my other side I've got my notes and brain splurge that I can just scribble down. Remember to write down the time, remember to write down the date if necessary. You don't need to have a Moleskine diary. I know they're a little bit on the pricey side, but I just always ask for one for Christmas because it is like my favourite diary, and you get stickers, and it's just my thing. I just need to have my diary. But you can have a normal notebook. You can get a different type, like an Astrocal notebook. Those Astrocal diaries, the ring-bound diaries, are brilliant. I'd never bought one for myself, but having seen one, I bought one for somebody else, and I was like, oh shit, why am I giving this to her? It's brilliant. So yeah, she didn't deserve it. So yeah, definitely explore your diaries, explore your options, but I think it's really essential to have a diary to just write down your musings, write your observations. And then, when you are trawling through your astrological transits, past, present and past, it's much easier for you to go back and say, I'm going to look at a time, like maybe, I want to look at when Uranus was in Aries, and particularly when the sun happened to be in that sign as well. So I can really tune into what was going on there. And you can go back to that diary, have a look at when Aries season was, when Uranus was in Aries. And let's face it, Uranus being in Aries for approximately 8 years, you're going to have 8 years worth of diary exploration that should give you a clearer idea of what that means to you. But that's if you've kept diaries. If you're new to this, just start doing it. It doesn't have to be, dear diary, today I did this, and then we went to the shop, and then I went and had some lunch, and I had this for lunch and that for lunch. I mean, maybe if you're a Taurus, you might want to do that, or Cancerian, maybe listing all your food. However, I'm talking about stuff like, I am absolutely fuming. I can't believe that so-and-so spoke to me like that. They really, really annoyed me. I've made my best effort here. I've done everything I could to try and keep the peace. I've actually apologised when I shouldn't have done, and they're still being rude to me. That's the gold. Because then you can look back and go, why did that trigger me so much? What is going on? And what was transiting at that time that A, prompted me to want to write, and B, I was so annoyed that I had to sit down and write for a good 10 minutes about it, Plus, it helps you get it off your chest without having to gossip, which isn't just great if you've got a Gemini ascendant like me, who, as you can tell, I can talk for... Oh, I nearly swore. As you can tell, I can talk for flipping hours. Oh, wow, I know I have sworn already in this episode, but I'm normally quite polite and I don't swear. So there's that one. And the final tip that I've got for you, which is going to be a whole nother episode, a whole nother time, is to check your astrocartography. Now, astrocartography is when you go on holiday somewhere and your whole chart relocates. Yes, it completely relocates. You have a different ascendant and a different midheaven. Sometimes you have a different, your moon placement stays the same. You have a different ascendant and a different midheaven. What happens is, let's, for example, use, Spain or something. So if say you're going on holiday to Spain, or Palma, I went on holiday to Palma Nova, you change your location and you change your time to reflect the time difference. So I think Palma Nova's like a couple of hours. Is it like 4 hours? Or is it can't be that much. Let's just, for argument's sake, say it's 2 hours ahead. So what you do is you cast your chart. I feel like it would be behind as well now. I don't know. I'm really crap at this. But either way, let's for argument's sake say that you're travelling somewhere. It's 2 hours ahead. What you do is you change your location. So you've got your normal birth chart, so your normal date of birth, and then you change your location to the location you're travelling to, and you factor in the time difference to your birth time. So if it's 2 hours ahead, say you were born at 2 o'clock in the afternoon, it would change to 4 o'clock in the afternoon for that specific location. Your ascendant and midheaven will change, your IC and your descendant will change, and if you have planets on the midheaven or the descendant or the ascendant or the IC, those are going to move around a bit, and stuff's going to move from one house to another. When I went to India, and I did a show about this, and I did tell everybody what happened, I exposed my little secret moon. Basically, my whole chart relocated. So Chiron, my mysterious Chiron placement, actually happened to be on the midheaven. Bang on the midheaven. I had my moon on the IC, and I had Mars on the descendant. Like a completely different chart. My rising sign was Leo. It made my midheaven Taurus. My whole chart shifted around. I think it put my sun in the 5th house, and I was like really enjoying the special kind of feeling that I got from being in India, that they really made us feel very special and important. And I just was like, yeah, I'm going to enjoy myself. I'm going to enjoy this experience. And it was very Leo. And so I had this Leo ascendant, and I had a 5th house, I believe it was a 5th house sun. And I really embraced it, but had some difficult experiences in India. And for the first time ever, I was able to connect with my Chiron in a really, really clear way. So if you haven't got the opportunity to travel anywhere, and you haven't got the opportunity to plan to put a planet on an angle or in a more prominent place so that you'll find it more tangible, why don't you think about all the places that you have travelled to, and then relocate your chart. So think, okay, New York. What's New York? Is it 7 hours? Oh my God, is it ahead or behind? Oh my God, you're screaming at me now. I can tell you're screaming at me. I'm sorry if I'm being ditzy. So 7 hours, say, behind us in New York. I feel like it's ahead, but I'm just getting confused now. And relocate. So say, Steph, 8th of January 1983, relocate my chart to New York. So the location's New York, and then subtract or add the time difference from your actual birth time. So you should still have your sun at the same degree, your moon should be at the same degree, all your planets should be at the same degree, but your angles should be different, and your planets will move around in the houses into different places. As previously mentioned, I can't remember which episode, probably Sagittarius or something, I talked about the fact that I booked a holiday to New York, and when I got there, well, after I'd booked the holiday, I thought, let me check and see what's going on for me astrologically, and I'll check my cartography, and I'll talk about that in another episode. But I went on to astro.com and looked at my astro mapping, and it just so happened that I booked the holiday for my Jupiter return without thinking, and I had also booked the holiday to visit my Jupiter line when Jupiter in my chart moved from the 6th house to the midheaven, to the 10th, well, to the cusp of the 10th, whatever house system you're using. It was on my MC. And there were lots of other things going on in the chart. What I thought was really interesting was that my boyfriend, he doesn't ever share posts on Facebook unless it's work related. He's not really much of a social media person, but when we were on holiday, he was constantly sharing stuff. So he changed a bit. His kind of behaviour changed a little bit. And yes, you're on holiday, but he was very, very different in his way that he behaved on social media. And for me, when I was boarding the plane, I was getting people contacting me from newspapers asking me to write articles for them about Theresa May, because at the time she was still Prime Minister, and is she going to lead us into Brexit and blah, 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 and all of that. So all of these like Jupiterian newspaper outlets and all of that kind of thing got in touch. And it's just a really interesting thing to observe. But I've also been on holidays elsewhere where, I've had other things that were angular or more prominent in the chart. And, when I think about what came from those experiences, it was it's very enlightening. So I would strongly suggest that you have a go at that and just try and connect with some of those more mysterious placements for yourself. And especially if you've ever been somewhere where those mysterious placements have been more obvious location-wise. So for me, for example, my 12th house Chiron happened to be on full display when I went to India. It's an interesting, it's interesting, and it helps you to connect with things. I wouldn't advise you to purposely book somewhere where you put maybe your Pluto rising or Pluto on the midheaven, because the thing is, when you do go to those places, you are going to experience them fully. So you have to be prepared. But either way, it's a very interesting study. Hope you found it useful. So, just to remember that, connecting with anything that's a bit difficult for you to connect with, you can use the sun, you can use the moon, you can use any planet really. But the sun and the moon are both very good because they both shed light in different ways. You can check when the planets are going to be rising or on the midheaven, your natal placements. You can also check when anything's transiting really to that certain area of your chart. Looking at the synastry you have with other people where they may be highlighting things for you, keeping a diary, and also thinking about holidays you've been on and whether or not your relocated chart has put something in a more prominent position for you in order for you to kind of connect with that in some way. So I hope you found it interesting. I always find it interesting to do this kind of self-work, and it's definitely harder for some people to connect with some of those difficult, more mysterious placements in their chart. I'd love for you to get in touch and tell me if you have struggled with getting in touch with certain placements. Any links that I have mentioned in today's show, I will provide in the description for you. If I ever forget anything, please get in touch and tell me so that I can provide the links for you and you can connect. All right, guys, take care. Don't forget to check out the Patreon page if you haven't already. Don't forget to leave me a review if you haven't already. And, just hope you guys are keeping well. Stay in touch, and I'll speak to you soon. Bye now.